Welcome to StoryTube, friends. Today I am finally recording a video that I've been thinking about, ruminating on for a long time, and it felt like a really daunting project to get into because I feel like it could be a video that could easily be 3 hours or 5 videos, and that's always something that stops me from starting if I don't have like an end in sight. But it felt like the right time, and there are two main places that this video is coming from. The first one is that when people tell me, friends specifically, but people in general tell me that they don't read or they don't like reading, I always have to restrain myself and refrain myself from talking at them for half an hour about why I think they might be wrong. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with having other hobbies and like reading not being your primary hobby or just not something that you enjoy. That's absolutely fine. But I do believe genuinely that reading can be and is for everybody, and that anyone who doesn't like reading just hasn't found the right book yet. It also helps that I've had some success stories. One of my best friends since secondary school didn't really read until we became friends, and it's one of my proudest accomplishments that I successfully made him into a reader. And so it's difficult for me not to see this as kind of a challenge, and just to try to probe and figure out and like let them know what books I think might really work for them. But I also don't want to talk at people and in the moment when they're not receptive to it, or like I don't want to campaign and like feel like I'm, telling them that they must adopt this hobby if they don't want to or they're not ready for it. And the second place that this video is coming from is that my favorite part of being a bookseller, so I used to be a bookseller, in case you haven't been here before, you haven't like heard me talk about it. I was a bookseller for about a year and a half. I took a break between corporate jobs because it was something that I always wanted to do, kind of a dream job kind of situation. And one of my favorite parts of being a bookseller was getting to recommend books to people, specifically when it was people that came, and this happened like relatively frequently in the fiction section where I worked, people that came and would say, listen, I've read like 3 books in my life, 3 novels, and I don't know where to go from here. They've done it for me, they haven't done it for me, or whatever. Or like, I read a book 10 years ago that I loved, but I never picked up another novel. I don't know where to start, or I want to get into reading. Where do I start? I miss getting to do that. So I figured, why not put all of that energy into a video, essentially with some recommendations, tips, prompts, questions to ask on how to get into reading fiction, how to get into reading novels, because it can be really overwhelming. And the good news is that, like I said, I believe that there is a book, and there are many books out there for anyone. But the bad news is that you won't really learn your taste until you try it, and through time and through experience and reading things that you like or don't like, and figuring out what works for you and what doesn't and why. So there will be specific book recommendations in this video, but that doesn't mean that if you are not interested in any of the books that I talk about, that's it for you and you're not interested in reading. These are just kind of examples of what I'm talking about, but I'm hoping that the structure of the video itself and like the kind of questions that I would ask of someone who wants to get into reading novels might help you ask those questions of yourself and just give you a direction of where to go. So typically, if somebody would come up to me, whether it's a friend or a customer in a bookshop, and asked for a book recommendation, that they're trying to get into reading, they want to read a novel, they want to pick up a novel, and they're not sure where to start, the first question that I would ask is, what's the last book that they read and enjoyed, if any? And if you do have a book that you read in the past and that you loved or like had a great time with, doesn't matter whether it was 6 months ago or 5 years ago or 15 years ago, that can be a good starting point. You could continue with the series. If it's a series, you could read more by that author if they have written more, or you could explore more of that genre and that type of story. And if the answer is no, there has been no book that you've read before that you have loved, then I would ask, is there anything that you've read that you haven't liked and why? What was it that didn't work for you? And from there, try to figure out what we can do better. So clearly you picked it up for a reason. Say, for example, somebody told me that they read Crime and Punishment and they really struggled with it. And they picked it up because they thought that it's a book that they should read and because it sounded like it could be interesting, but that they struggled with how it was written and that it was long. Then I would look, okay, so this person is interested in maybe reading classics, like big names, so they can feel like they're checking off a big box. They're interested in the themes of Crime and Punishment, so we can either go down another classic that might be a little bit more accessible, or we can go down a similar kind of tone as Crime and Punishment, but maybe something more modern. Or we can try to combine the two if that's possible, and maybe make it a little bit shorter. Now, I won't dwell on this section for too long because the answer to this question is very, very open-ended and I can't predict what book you might mention or what was wrong with it or what you loved about it. But I do want to say that if the answer is The Hunger Games, and specifically because of the whole political aspect of The Hunger Games, I think you should give Red Rising a go. Just putting that out there. Now, the next question I would ask, or the next thing I would try to find out, is if there's anything else that this person has been reading. Like, you might not read novels and you want to try to get into that, but maybe you do read nonfiction, or you read comics, or you read manga. Now, this is completely an assumption, might not apply to everybody, but if somebody tells me that they don't read novels, they want to try to get into novels, but they read nonfiction, then I would go towards, okay, so if you're reading nonfiction, you're probably reading it because it's real. You're learning something. You're informing yourself about something. Now, I think you can learn a ton from fiction. That doesn't have to be learning specifics about the real world, but you can learn empathy. You can learn psychology from fictional characters. You learn vocabulary and grammar and those kinds of things. But if we're talking about tangible, I learned about this place, I learned about this time period, I learned about this thing, I have some recommendations here that might be interesting for you if you read nonfiction. Now, the first one won't be a surprise for anyone that has watched this channel before. I have to get it out of the way, and I have recommended this before to people that tell me that they read nonfiction, and that is The Power of the Dog by Dawn Winslow. The Power of the Dog is about the war on drugs and drug cartels in Mexico. It is very much based on real events. So Dawn Winslow spent a long time researching for this book. He spent some time in Mexico, I don't think living there, but definitely traveling there a lot to do his research. And it is based around El Chapo, if you know anything about Mexican drug cartels. It starts in the 60s, it spans 40 years, and it is a crime epic, I would call it. It's about all the big players, governments, organized religion, and all the way down to individuals who are caught up in this current of events and of violence and everything that goes into the war on drugs, how it's been fought, why, what the motivations are, where the money goes, all of these things. And because it's so meticulously researched and so accurate, even though obviously some characters are made up, a lot of them are based on real people, you do learn a lot about how the world works. But on top of that, you get a fascinating story, an action-packed story, and incredible characters to follow. Now, this is a bit of a longer book. That doesn't have to be a deterrent. I know plenty of people who don't read a lot who just pick up long books and read them for 2, 3, 4 months, that's absolutely fine. If you've been watching BookTube or Book Talk trying to get recommendations, that's great, but you might feel intimidated by people that read like 150 books in a year, or even 50 books in a year, or a book a week. Don't feel pressured. You are just as valid of a reader if you take 3 months to read a book or longer. Who cares? Whatever rhythm works for you. Now, I think that in terms of genre, for people that read nonfiction, crime and historical fiction are the ones that immediately come to mind for me, that might have this grounding in reality and in like real events where you can learn something tangible. So I have 2 historical fiction recommendations here. One is the Six Tudor Queens series by Alison Weir. So she wrote a book about each of Henry VIII's wives, and the first one is this one. It's about Catherine of Aragon. Her and Philippa Gregory are probably the 2 big names in Tudor era historical fiction writing, and both of them focus a lot on the women specifically. There are other big names, Hilary Mantel, for example, but Philippa Gregory and Alison Weir focus on the women of the time that maybe are omitted a little bit from like school books and stuff like that. So the reason I'm picking Alison Weir here is that she is the one that does more research. It's quite a little bit more dense and very focused on the real facts and details of history. And then the other historical fiction that I want to recommend, which is the complete opposite in terms of being dense, is Munich by Robert Harris. In fact, I think any book by Robert Harris I would recommend. This one in particular is about the Munich Agreement shortly before World War II. And we have 2 diplomats, one is German and one is English. And they meet again briefly, and they went to school together, to university together, and they were friends. And now they're on opposing sides of World War II. It's a very, very readable book. It's has some elements of like spy thriller, of like people trying to do things that they shouldn't be doing, and like government bureaucracy and that kind of thing. But it is effectively a historical fiction book. I think that is how I would categorize it. There's not really any crimes being committed or like big car chases or anything like that. It is about 2 people on the verge of World War II doing their best to stand up for what they believe in within the limitations of their governments, their citizenships, their locations and their lives. And it's a great book. I have 2 more for this section. One is a bit unconventional, perhaps. That is Kindred by Octavia Butler. Now, the reason I'm saying it's unconventional for somebody who would tell me that they like nonfiction is that it does involve a little bit of time travel. However, I wouldn't call this a sci-fi book, even though you will find it in sci-fi sections of bookshops. So basically, we have a woman named Dana in the 70s. In the US, she is a black woman, and she time travels to 1815 on a plantation. You might imagine how that goes for her. So the reason I'm recommending this for nonfiction readers is that it is a very harrowing look at slavery, but through this character who has a more modern point of view on it. So it's kind of inserting someone from the 20th century back into those times and that situation. And it is really an exercise in how much is a person willing to or able to adapt to a situation. It is a very, very dark book, but it's also very readable. I found it kind of compulsively readable. I read it very quickly. I kept turning the page without noticing that I was turning the page. I was so hooked on the story, but it's not a light read at all, but it read almost like it was. So, which I think, why I think it's a really good recommendation for someone who might not read a lot. You might be a slower reader, might be intimidated by big books, but you want those themes. You want to like maybe a darker story, a meaty story that's going to make you think, but is also very, very readable. And then the last one for this section is A Thousand Splendid Suns by Khaled Hosseini. This is one of my favorite books ever, and it's set in Afghanistan. It's about two women in Afghanistan throughout the 80s and 90s. And honestly, at the time that I read it, it taught me most of what I knew about Afghanistan in that time. It's one of my favorite reasons to read fiction because it can broaden your horizons by putting you in the mind of somebody else with different lived experience and different perspectives than yourself or than anybody maybe surrounding you. And this book, in a way like Kindred, is very readable while being quite dark, but I would definitely say it's more hopeful overall. And the real strength here are the characters that you latch onto, and they carry this wonderful, beautiful, dark, sad story, and you might learn something from the place that it's set in. Realistically, if somebody told me that they read comics or manga, we would have to have a whole other conversation that would be enough for a whole other video, because I would want to get into what kind of comics, what kind of manga, what kind of stories are they, why, what do you latch onto about it. So it's a little bit more complicated than that, but I want to keep it relatively brief. If somebody told me that they like reading comics and manga and they want to try to get into novels, I would probably think, okay, so like comics, manga, even watching anime, right? Like it's a more visual medium. You're still reading, but you have the art as well as the words to go with it. So my mind would go towards recommending books that are written in quite a cinematic way, where it's very easy to picture what's happening. And that's relative, because some people need more description, some people need less description or want less description. So it's a fine line. It's not like these books are super descriptive. It's kind of the opposite, more like it's books that are efficient in how they give you descriptions. So it's easy to have an idea of what you're visualizing, but you also get to fill in those gaps based on prompts, kind of. And the first one there is Red Rising. So I mentioned it briefly earlier. If you were a fan of the Hunger Games growing up, I think this is the natural progression of that kind of book. But Red Rising is a dystopia. It's set in, I think, roughly 300 years in the future. Humanity has colonized Mars, and the Reds are a type of human who are kind of genetically altered, I suppose, at this point. They're very small, to live in the mines of Mars. They are pioneers. They are preparing Mars, digging for elements to terraform Mars, to prepare it for the people on Earth to be able to leave Earth and join them on Mars. And pretty early on, we find out that that was a lie, that Mars has been colonized for hundreds of years and that they have been kept as slaves in the dark. This is a 7-book series. The 7th book is the only one that isn't out yet. It doesn't have a release date, but tentatively I'd say probably 2026. It is one of my favorite series. It starts quite grounded, very reminiscent of the Hunger Games, especially the first book has a similar kind of battle school where some students could die kind of setup. And then from there, it takes you into a full space opera, intergalactic war, revolution type of thing. But it does it slowly, so you get used to it and you're going with the characters. And I think the characters are the real strength of this series, but there's so much to it. It's so fun. You can read it as a pure adventure series, just like war speeches and like found family and friendship. But you can also read it as this, especially as it goes on into the like later books, dark exploration of revolution, the consequences of revolution. It's not as easy as overthrowing the evil emperor and then go live happily ever after. You have to have a plan. There's going to be disagreements. There might be civil war. How do you move on from that? Power always corrupts people. Violence begets violence begets violence. You can read this on so many levels, but it starts with just having fun and then slowly eases you in until it throws you into space. I adore these books. And I think they're honestly great for somebody who wants to get into reading fiction and is open to genre fiction and this type of story, if this is something that sounds interesting to you, I think this is a great place to start. It is so propulsive. Things keep happening. You will care about what happens, in my opinion. So yeah, I cannot recommend this series enough. Another one for people that read comics or manga, I would say, is the Reacher books by Lee Child. You might have seen these in airports or in any mainstream bookshop. So this is a crime series or thriller series. The main character is Jack Reacher, who is an military investigator. I don't remember. There's also a series on Amazon, and the reason I'm putting it here for comic book fans is because I think Reacher is kind of a superhero. He doesn't have superpowers, but you get that similar kind of satisfaction because he is always going to win at the end of the day, and he does not put up with bullies or bullshit. They're his two least favorite things in the world. He is a drifter, I should mention. He travels around only with a toothbrush, and he just seems to always find trouble in small North American towns. I read him as a little bit autistic, to be honest. He just can't get over injustice. He can't get over people being mean, and he won't put up with it. He is also 7 feet tall, so he's usually the biggest person in the room, and he's smart, and Lee Child is smart enough to write him smart. So if you read superhero comics, I think this might actually do it for you. Now, I'm holding up Persuader. You don't have to start with the first one. The first one is Killing Floor. I started with Without Fail, which is really good, but you can kind of pick up any of them where the premise sounds interesting. It doesn't matter. They don't have to be read in order. And then the last one I'm going to hold up here, a little bit out of left field maybe, but I think that people that are into manga in general, now I'm not saying any specific manga, I'm not super well read in manga, I've tried very few of them, but I think you might like, maybe, perhaps, The Infernal Devices by Cassandra Clare. I am basing this on the fact that I have recently understood what it is about manga, at least for me, or anime. I'm putting them both in the same bracket here, even though we're looking specifically at people that read manga, but it doesn't matter. It's very dramatic. It can be very melodramatic and very emo. And this is how I figured, oh, this might actually be for me, even though I initially thought it wasn't, because I was an emo teenager. And I love me some melodrama. And this trilogy has some wonderful melodrama and some great emo moments. It also has some really cool steampunk imagery. This would be so good if somebody made a really good TV show. It could also be really bad, but if somebody made it good, oh, it could be so good. Now, Cassandra Clare has written a ton of books in the Shadowhunter universe. Do not worry about it. You can start with this one. It's Clockwork Angel. It's the first one of a trilogy. You can just read those 3, and then if you want to explore more, you can. I have a video about that I'll link in the description if you're interested. But this is YA, I should mention, and it is Victorian London. Tessa Gray is American, and she arrives in London and she meets these people who are shadow hunters. They are demon hunters. Demons that regular people can't see, but they are protected by the shadow hunters. And this is just so vibey and melodramatic, and people declaring love for each other and like talking about their emotions and having existential crises. And then there's villains and there's like robots, well, automatons, whatever, same thing. And it's just glorious. It's glorious. There's the London fog. I love it. I love it so much. Now you might say, okay, that's all well and good, but I don't really read anything. I don't read nonfiction or comics, manga. I'm going straight to novels. That's cool. In that case, the next question I would ask is, what kind of movies are you into? And what I'm getting at with this question is I'm kind of trying to figure out how open you are to genre fiction without asking So what do you want? Do you want fiction? Do you want sci-fi? Do you want fantasy? Some people might then say, no, I don't want fantasy, or I don't want sci-fi, or I don't want horror. But I found that I get a better idea of how open you would be to different genres by asking about favorite movies. Taste in movies doesn't have to be the same as taste in books. You can be into westerns watching movies because you like the music and the aesthetic, and then that's not in the book, so you might not be into the books as much. Like, it doesn't have to be a perfect correlation, but it does give you a starting point. It also tells me what kind of stories you might be into. Are you into adventure? Are you into stories with great characters? Are you into atmosphere and vibes? Are you into scary stories? Are you into themes? Like, what do you like, anti-heroes? Like, what is it that you're looking for? What might hook you? Now, unfortunately, I can't ask you personally what your favorite movies are, or what type of movie you gravitate towards. So it's difficult to give recommendations for this section that might apply to kind of anybody, especially without making this video 3 hours long. But again, this can give you an indication. If you ask yourself these questions, what kind of movies are you into? Why are you into them? It can give you a starting point. But I have some suggestions here for some common answers that I would get. The first one, and probably the easiest one for me, is if you like rom-coms, you should be reading Emily Henry. I just think there's no better direct comparison, because I had never read a contemporary romance, but I always loved rom-coms. When I finally read Emily Henry, I thought, why was I not reading this the entire time? What is wrong with me? So if you are in any way into stories about two people falling in love, Emily Henry is your person. So I picked out a couple here just to mention my favorites. In book lovers, we have sort of rivals, two lovers set up. The main character is like, she describes herself as the woman that gets dumped at the beginning of the rom-com, so the man can go and find his true love in some like quirky bakery or like idyllic home, like small town or something like that. And the love interest, she's an agent in publishing, and her love interest is an editor, and they are rivals. They think they don't like each other, but obviously that will change. Great book. This is one of my favorite books. Happy Place is a second chance romance. So the two main characters, Harriet and Wynne, have broken up, and we kind of get them, how they met originally, and them meeting again, and how they fell in love originally, and how they find their way back to each other. And this is also just a book about being 30 or 30 something, and like how your friendship dynamics have changed. It hit me at the right time. And then funny story, I would say, if you like New Girl, bonus points, you're a cool person. New Girl is amazing. And this reminded me a little bit of New Girl, but the concept here is really fun. It's the main character, Daphne, gets dumped by her fiance, who on his bachelor party, I think, at his bachelor party, decides that he's actually in love with his best friend Petra, and they run off together, leaving Daphne without a house because she has to move out of his house. So she moves in with Miles, who is the ex-boyfriend of her ex-fiance's new girlfriend. So they start pretend dating to piss them off, and it's so fun. If you like Breaking Bad, I would point you back towards The Power of the Dog by Dawn Winslow. However, if you say, okay, that's a little bit too long for me, or maybe like too big in proportions, sounds intimidating, that's fair enough. I would then point you towards Savages by Dawn Winslow, which is much smaller in scale, but still involves drug cartels and people who get in way over their head. The main characters here are Ben, Sean, and O. They are from Southern California. They like surfing and volleyball and being in the sun. And Ben and Sean also grow amazing weed. In fact, it's so amazing that the drug cartels get interested. And when they don't want to give them their business, they kidnap O, who is in a relationship with both of them, by the way. And this is a very stylized book, very particular in its style, but it also has extremely short chapters and extremely short sentences. Look at this. So I think this is really good for somebody who is starting to read novels. Because especially if you're like a slow reader, or if you want to get that sense of accomplishment, you read these pages so fast. Now, the story might not be for you, but if it is, it will be a very fast read. Very violent, very explicit, so be warned. If you like The Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones, well, obviously you could read The Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones. That's actually something that I wanted to say at the beginning of this section. I don't know if I'd necessarily recommend going back to read books that your favorite movies or shows are based on, because it might not hook you as much because you already know the story and you love the movie or the TV show. So I'm not sure if that's the best thing to get you into reading. What you could do, however, is go to that author and pick something different by them. So for example, if you liked Conclave last year, that is based on a book by Robert Harris, which I have on good authority is a very accurate adaptation. I've also read Robert Harris before. I mentioned Munich earlier. So if you love that story in movie form, you might like other stories that same author has written. Not necessarily, but it could be somewhere to start. Now, if you like Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones, you like fantasy. Now, there are so many fantasy books or series that I could recommend here, and I feel like real fantasy fans would maybe get upset at the one that I'm going to recommend, but I don't care. And also, this is one that has a proven success rate in the past with people that I know who were not really into reading and picked up this book and adored it. And that book is The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. Now, I will give you a word of warning. This is the first book in a trilogy. The second book is also out. The third book is not out. And it has been 14 years since the second one came out. So the third book might never come out. I still think this is worth reading. I still think you get enough of the story where, sure, you don't get all the answers of the mysteries, but I still think that the story of the first two books is worth it. It's beautifully written. It's a first-person narrative, so you're following one singular character, which I think is easier to start with fantasy than going into one with loads of point of views and loads of characters to keep track of. I also think it's kind of a natural progression if you grew up with Harry Potter, because you have a young protagonist, a young boy who becomes an orphan, who then struggles going through the world by himself, but is also very gifted. And then you have a magic school section. So I think it's a natural progression of Harry Potter. And if you're into fantasy in general, I just think that it would be a great book to start out the genre with. Now, if Game of Thrones is a lot more heavily weighted for you than Lord of the Rings, I would also throw in there The Faithful and the Fallen series by John Gwynne, starting with Malice. If you like Star Wars, I have great news for you, because if you like Star Wars and you would like to get into reading some novels, there's a very obvious choice for you, and that is reading some Star Wars books. I have picked out two here to recommend specifically. This one is Heir to the Empire, and it is what was the original idea, to put it that way, for basically episode 7. So before The Force Awakens was a thing, before Disney Star Wars was a thing, the continuation after Return of the Jedi was written by Timothy Zahn in a trilogy, which starts with Heir to the Empire. And many, would say that it was the better version of how that story might continue. So if that interests you, give this a go. But you don't have to start with that. You don't have to go post Return of the Jedi. There are so many Star Wars books that you can start with, and I would recommend just picking whatever era you are interested in. Again, this is a whole other video, and there's loads of videos out there from people that have read a lot more Star Wars books than me, but I had to include this one because it was where I started with reading Star Wars, or sort of. I love Darth Vader. He's my favorite character. Anakin is my favorite character, both of them. I see them as one person. I just love a lot about Darth Vader. I think I'm going to make a video about Darth Vader. Anyway, if you are like me, you could read the Dark Lord trilogy. Now, this is not really a trilogy. It's just 3 books about Vader that you can kind of read one after the other, but you don't have to. This book, this omnibus, collects all 3 of them, but you can get them in little individual mass market paperbacks. The first one is Labyrinth of Evil by James Luceno, and it kind of leads into Revenge of the Sith. It's what happens right before Revenge of the Sith starts. It explains how Palpatine and why was kidnapped, where Obi-Wan and Anakin were right before that. It has some banter between them, and it just sets up the beginning of that movie. The next one is Revenge of the Sith by Matthew Stover. Yes, this is a novelization of the movie. I highly, highly, highly recommend you read that if you love Star Wars, especially if you, like me, are a prequels apologist that thinks that they are amazing movies, or could have been amazing movies, more like, that were just not executed, to their full potential. This book is better than it has any right to be. And I know I just said that maybe reading the book that your favorite movies are based on is not the best idea. In this case, I think it is, because it's a different story, right? Like, the movie is the original, and this is more of like an adaptation, like the other way around. But he gives it, all the same things happen, but he gives it a voice and internal narration that just enhances the movie. And it's amazing. And you will love it if you love Star Wars. I highly recommend. And then the third one is once again by James Luceno, and it's the Rise of Darth Vader. And it's kind of like what happens right after Revenge of the Sith, and his first couple of weeks, I think, as Vader in the suit. It's the weakest one of the 3, just him kind of hunting down Jedi, but I still enjoyed it as like a bookend, and kind of like just leading out of Revenge of the Sith. If you like Pixar movies, and specifically if you like Up, A Man Called Ove by Fredrik Backman. This is translated from Swedish, and there's actually a movie adaptation called A Man Called Otto with Tom Hanks. So if you've watched that, maybe don't read the book. But to me, this is Up, but better. It's an old man who's very, very grumpy. He's a widower. Yeah, he's forced to interact with his neighbors. Let's just put it that way. There's not much more to say. It's sad and funny. This book made me both laugh and cry. Engaging from the very first page, and just heartwarming. Okay, we're getting very specific now, and I'm going to wrap this section up. But this is just such a good comparison that I had to put it in here, even if it's not as popular of a TV show. But if you have watched For All Mankind on Apple TV, and you love that show, you simply have to read The Calculating Stars by Mary Robinette Kowal. This is also alternative history about space travel. So basically in the 50s, a meteorite hits Washington, D.C., and this meteorite causes global warming to accelerate, which means that the Earth will not be inhabitable within a few decades. So the only option is space, which is why in this alternate history, space exploration is basically the number 1 priority. And they get to the moon sooner, and they try to get to Mars, all that. And the main character is Elma, who is a former fighter pilot in World War II, and also a computer, which means basically a mathematician. Before computers, what we know as computers, did all the maths and all the calculations for us, it was people, and it was usually women. And then she becomes an astronaut. This was the book that got me into science fiction. This was the book that made me realize that I like science fiction. And again, it's a book that's extremely readable and engaging. Just very, very easy to fall into. Very smooth. So I have 2 more here. And then I'm wrapping this section up. The first one, well, actually 3, because I didn't grab one of them. If you like World War II movies, All the Light We Cannot See, or The Book Thief. The Book Thief is classified as YA because the main characters are kids, like young teenagers. Doesn't matter. I think it's a book for teenagers and adults alike. Both of these books will get you emotionally invested and probably make you cry. Last but certainly not least, this is kind of along the lines with rom-coms, but not just rom-coms. So if you like some romance but you want there to be more to it, this might be a book and an author for you. Also, if you like a little bit of gossip, like at high society, like do you like Downton Abbey? Do you like Gossip Girl? That kind of vibe. It's not exactly like that, but if you're into that kind of vibe, you should read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is hugely popular on Book Talk, on BookTube, in bestseller, like everywhere. There's a reason for that. This is a great book. We're following the story of Evelyn Hugo, who was an old school Hollywood actress who was married 7 times. Kind of reminded me of like Elizabeth Taylor. And she is for the first time giving a tell-all kind of interview. She has handpicked the reporter. We don't really know why she has picked this reporter. And she is going to tell her the story of her life and the story behind each one of her marriages. And the book is divided into 7 parts, one for each husband. And it's so good. It's so readable. The characters are great and believable, and it's emotional. It will make you cry. It will make you laugh. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. The last 2 questions that maybe I would ask, or that you can ask yourself, are what has been keeping you from reading, and specifically reading novels, maybe, and what do you want to get out of it now? So in terms of what has been keeping you from reading, it could be anything. I'm not going to venture to guess like every single reason why somebody has not picked up a book. Maybe you just haven't thought of picking up a book before. That's perfectly valid. Is it because it feels intimidating, or boring even, or pretentious and stuck up? Reading can be as pretentious or unpretentious as you want it to be. You could be reading classics, or you could be reading Star Wars. You can be an adult and read YA. You can shut off your brain and read about a 7-foot autistic man punching bullies in the face. You might be sitting on the sofa, but you could be reading about space battles and drug cartels. It could also be an attention span thing, concentration. Like, do you struggle to concentrate on something for a long period of time on the book? Do you find yourself getting distracted? That is something that you can train your brain on. I think it happens like sometimes you just have other things on your mind and it can be difficult to sink into a book. That's normal, but it's also a muscle that you need to train and that you can train. And there, like, some really basic tips I would give is maybe don't pick super long books to start with, so you can like feel like there's an end in sight. Books with shorter chapters, that can give you a feeling of accomplishment because you realize, oh, there's like points to stop, natural points to stop pretty frequently. And if you then continue past those points, you feel like, oh, I'm continuing. This is going well. It's just this subconscious thing. Another one like that is big font. I like bigger font anyway, but it just gives you a sense of accomplishment if you keep turning the page. Dialogue heavy books, same thing. You just read them a little bit faster and it helps give you a sense of accomplishment. Out of the books that I've been mentioning, the ones that I would say I would recommend to people who specifically are like, I'm not sure if I struggle to concentrate for a long period of time or to like let myself sink into things. Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, extremely readable because of how it's written and the structure of it. A Man Called Ove, if you read the first couple of pages and the sense of humor works for you, you'll be sucked in straight away. Savages, kind of the same thing. You'll know pretty quickly if it's for you, if you love it or you hate it. But it is such a quick read because of how it's written and you can just keep turning pages. And even if you're not like loving it, it's still something that you can read fast because of how it's written. I picked Funny Story here, but honestly, any Emily Henry, if you're into rom-coms, like I said, it's just very simply written, but not clunky or not bad or like dumber or anything like that. Just very, very accessible and compulsively readable. She has a gift with like making you get the characters straight away and then you're just invested. The Calculating Stars, This has a big font and you keep turning the page very, very quickly. And I read this book so fast, and it kind of eases you into science fiction as well. So like you learn the concept little by little. You don't have to like situate yourself in a completely different environment straight away. And then I have 2 bonus books that I haven't mentioned before because they didn't super neatly fit into my categories. But depending on what you're into, they could really work for you. And I think they're books that can grab you really fast. And that is Boy Parts by Eliza Clark, which has been pitched to me as like female American Psycho. I also recommended it to people as a bookseller as female American Psycho. Dark, but funny, and like darkly feminist in a way, like women get to be fucked up too. If that premise intrigues you, please pick it up. And The Trees by Percival Everett, which is a satire about racism in the US, but specifically in the South. It's set in Money, Mississippi. And again, it's very, very funny, but also poking at some very real, very dark bits of history that are not as much in the past as we would like them to be. And then what do you want to get out of it? I think this kind of is a summary question that you can apply to all of the other questions, maybe once you're trying to narrow it down. But why is it that you want to try to get into reading novels? Is it because you want to have fun? Is it because you want to learn something in a different way? Is it because there are books that you want to have read? Do you want to try some classics? Now, I have purposefully not put classics on this list because I think often people, and I've been like guilty of this as well, you don't necessarily want to read the classic, you want to have read it. And I think if you pick something up because you want to have read it, it's a recipe for failure because you just want it to end. You're not actually in it for the activity of reading that book. However, if you do want to read classics, if that is what you're primarily interested in, I think there are many that are actually surprisingly accessible. And the ones I would like to mention are, first of all, Jane Austen. I think Jane Austen is hilarious, and her books are actually quite easy to read and engaging if that's the vibe that you're into. If you like her movie adaptations, I think you should try and give her a go. Maybe not Pride and Prejudice because you're like people are so familiar with that story. If you're not, then go for Pride and Prejudice. I would maybe go for Northanger Abbey if you're into the sense of humor. It's one of my favorites. I haven't read all of them. I haven't read Sense and Sensibility or Emma, but Jane Austen I think is an accessible classic. And she's just really, really good. Another one I would recommend if you want to dip your toes into the Russians, but you're intimidated by like the length of War and Peace or Crime and Punishment. Crime and Punishment is actually not that long, but it's complex. I would recommend The Death of Ivan Ilyich by Tolstoy, which is a novella about death. It's quite depressing, but it was my first Tolstoy, and it surprised me how accessible, readable, just easy to read it was and engaging, and it kind of prepped me for wanting to read War and Peace in the first place. And then the third one I want to recommend in terms of classics is Alexander Dumas. If you are not intimidated by length, go for it and read The Count of Monte Cristo. It is an excellent adventure story. However, if you are in any way concerned about long books, maybe don't start there. It's like notoriously long. You could start with The Three Musketeers. Now, I haven't read The Three Musketeers. I've just read The Count of Monte Cristo. But he writes adventure books and swashbuckling, wave the rapier around. It's very French and it's very fun. And just, I think that could shatter some preconceived notions about classics being like stuffy and stiff and not very fun. There are so many other factors that could influence what the right book for you is. It depends on your mood. It could be that there's a book that's not for you right now and it will be in 6 months or 6 years. It could be that there's a book that you might have loved 5 years ago and now you wouldn't because your circumstances have changed. But I do hope that this has been helpful and interesting in any way. If I had to sum it up somehow, I would say the single most important thing, I think, to set you up for success for like getting into reading novels is to be really excited about the book that you're picking up. If you're not excited about it, if you're picking it up because, I don't know, somebody else told you to, or it's the one that was available, it might surprise you and you might be really into it, but it's going to be a little bit more difficult to have that motivation, because it will demand, any book is going to demand something from you initially, because you have to do the work of letting yourself sink into it and reading enough to either judge that it's not for you or let yourself be absorbed by it. So I think the single most important thing is that you are really excited about picking up the book that you're picking up. So I would recommend going to bookshops, browsing, having an idea maybe of what you're looking for, but reading the first couple of pages, reading the back, getting a sense for the writing style. If you read the first chapter or two in the shop and it makes you want to keep going, bring it home and keep going. Reading is also a hobby that is often enjoyed in isolation by yourself at home. It can feel like a very solitary hobby, but it doesn't have to be. I think buddy reading, picking a book with a friend that you talk about, can make it a more social experience and can also keep you motivated, right? Like, you're not just reading it for yourself, you're reading it to see what the other person thinks about it and to have something to talk about. So that can be really fun as well. I hope this was interesting. I hope this was helpful to anybody. It was really fun to plan and film, even though I feel like I've kind of only scratched the surface. I feel like most of these sections could be their own videos, and maybe I'll do that. Let me know if you'd be interested. If you are, I might get the motivation to eventually do something like that. For now, let me know in the comments if you enjoyed the video. Let me know if you are an established reader, what books got you into reading and how did you get into reading. It's always interesting for me to find out, because I grew up reading, so there are books that I can pinpoint to that definitely made me the reader that I am. It never felt like a choice for me to become a reader. It was just always kind of there. So I'd be curious, and if you found this video because you're trying to get into novels, let me know if it was helpful. Let me know if you pick anything up, whether it's from this video or not. Happy reading. You are in for a hell of a ride, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you so much for watching. Like the video if you liked it, and subscribe to the channel if you're interested in more videos about books. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.